Thank you. My name is Gail Schaefer. I come from the town of Blenheim, which has been alluded to several times this evening. We in Blenheim know very well what it is like to have, as a neighbor, a pipeline. In our case, a liquid propane pipeline. This issue of a pipeline is not an abstract issue for us. I would like to show you the portrait of Bobby Hitchcock, our former assistant fire chief, who was killed in the terrible tragedy that we experienced on March 13, 1990. In the late 1960s, Texas Eastern, now Enterprise Pipeline, slashed through our farm and our community with this sleeping giant. And it took many years for us to really fully understand the consequences of it. Of course, we had no choice at the time. It was eminent domain, and we had no choices. And in 1990, my father, who was a farmer and then town supervisor, woke one morning to see this huge white cloud of vapor coming out of the ground where the pipeline company had just had a bulldozer doing repairs that week. So their criminal negligence, in my opinion, they were never held accountable, of course, but their criminal negligence resulted in terrible tragedy for our town. 2 lives lost, 7 people injured, 17 buildings lost, 52 acres of land burned, and tremendous trauma that we've experienced ever since. And the same pipeline, if you think that they really learn from their lessons or care about your community, they've had 2 further serious incidents just in the few years since then, one of which was an explosion again, which fortunately no people were involved because the homes were vacant at the time in the winter. But there was another leak only a couple of years ago, a few miles from us in Rome Center, where people could have been killed. Fortunately, they evacuated people before an explosion did occur. But for Bobby Hitchcock, and by the way, this portrait of Bobby was done by my neighbor, Rebecca Littlejohn, an artist who is with me here tonight as well. So the multiple episodes that we have experienced have really left a permanent scar on our community and in our region. It's also important to note how many stream crossings these pipelines in this area, particularly the one in Blenheim, but I know there are others in the northern part, involve, and the pipeline exposures due to erosion are a very serious concern. As I said, we've had several further incidents of major consequence in our area. So I really hope that when you do the impact statement, public safety will be of the highest priority, and the standards that they are held accountable, if they are citing this anywhere, will be the highest possible standards. There have been many incidents in the news recently of further pipeline explosions. One only a few months ago in Manchester, England, was in the international league, where many people were killed. I'd also like to emphasize agriculture. We are not only the breadbasket of the American Revolution, as one of the speakers alluded to, we also are the home of the very first agricultural district in the entire United States of America. We pioneered this agricultural district here in Schoharie Valley, and the farmland here is prime farmland, still considered among the top 10 farmland regions of the entire country. So to the extent that we put further pressures of vulnerability on that tremendous resource, we are truly being unwise in our public policy, in my opinion. I also feel that it's important to address the depth requirements when you have these hearings. I think it's extremely important, particularly in cases of stream crossings and railroad crossings and highway crossings, that these companies be forced to go to a greater depth. In the case of the one that was built in our area in the 60s, obviously they're not going to dig the whole thing up and do it over again, but the area that they had excavated was right near a highway crossing where there's major traffic going over and impacting the stability of that pipeline. Also, they said, when I was at the meeting in Cobleskill recently, they said, when I asked them about the depth they intend, they said 3 feet would probably be their minimum depth. And I don't think that that's deep enough. I think it should be 5 feet, 4 to 5 feet at least, because of the frost level in our climate. But I also think it should be much, much deeper than that for stream and railroad and highway crossings. These people are going to make gazillions of dollars profiting from these pipelines, and they should invest in extraordinary measures to preserve the safety of these pipelines to the extent possible. Someone else had mentioned the blasting industry, the quarry industry and the blasting involved. That's a real safety factor. We also have considerable seismic activity in this area. The day before Hurricane Irene, there was an earthquake in the area, and there have been others. In fact, 2 or 3 months after our pipeline explosion of 1990, there was an earthquake whose epicenter was in Summit, just a few miles from us. So these factors need to be included also. As far as landowner compensation, I can certainly say from the experience in the town of Lenham that they really get away with highway robbery. The compensation is so minimal to landowners, and landowners don't have any choices. We also, as was mentioned, have several major dams in this area to worry about. So dam breach analysis should be done for these high hazard dams throughout the watershed. And how would these pipelines be impacted if those kinds of dams were to give way? Just for your information, the Gilboa Dam at Schoharie Reservoir, which is the northernmost part of the New York City water supply system, and only a few miles south of Blenheim, upstream from Blenheim, only 6 years ago was identified as the most vulnerable dam in all of the United States of America, because the city of New York, another bad neighbor of ours, had done zero maintenance for 50 years. So deferred maintenance once again resulted in criminal neglect. So had that high hazard dam collapsed with its 19 billion gallons of water, this valley would have been totally wiped out, even worse than it has been in this terrible recent tragedy. I'd also like to fortify the comments that some others have made about the sinister linkage to the hydrofracking industry and its designs on our whole Northeast region. I think that hydrofracking is totally unwarranted in terms of the current state of their technology, the deceitfulness of this industry, the lack of disclosure. These hydrofracking companies, which are linked to obviously to the pipeline companies, are refusing to disclose the full list of the chemicals, the hazardous chemicals that they're putting. There is a soup of about 500 chemicals, which include neurotoxins and carcinogens, and they want to put this down at high pressure into our ground and really jeopardize the most precious resource we have, which is our water. And I think that you as public servants, along with the EPA and other sister agencies of the federal government and the state government, ought to be looking at the overarching issue that we should reduce our dependence on not only foreign oil, but on fossil fuels, and really get serious about investing in renewable energies, clean energy, to not only to keep the pristine nature of Schoharie Valley, but our whole planet. And for those who don't look at climate change, that's a serious issue, and the hydrocarbons that we're visiting upon our planet by human excesses, it's time that we really look at the science seriously. And the petrochemical industry is making record profits, and they're highly subsidized by our politicians who take our taxpayer money to put into their record profit pockets. So let's see that they have to really pay back and for these kinds of consequences if they're going to go forward with it. Don't allow them to do hydrofracking, and don't allow them to put this whole spider web of more and more pipelines across our precious country. Now, I mentioned that in our rural community, several people have mentioned that the rural character of our community that we really care about. We don't want heavy industry. We already have a lot of bad neighbors who've taken advantage of our resources because we're rural, because we're of lower population. We have the Gilmore Dam, we have the New York Power Authority power project, we have the Enterprise pipeline, and a couple other pipelines in this county. I think it's time to not put another, not let Schoharie County be once again victimized by this. We have had enough experiences of sharing our resources with bad neighbors who are sleeping giants that can kill and maim our community. If this is going to New York City and New England, I sort of remember, since we're in the school here, that in geometry, the shortest distance between the 2 points is a straight line. So why do they have to come through our pristine, scenic, historic, and fertile Schoharie Valley to deliver this to those receiving communities? They don't really have to. Let them find another way. We have had enough tragedies here, and we do not want more. And finally, and it's been mentioned that we have a lot of natural disasters too. We can't totally avoid Mother Nature, obviously. The 500-year flood that we experienced in this valley was devastating. It was exacerbated by some of those bad neighbors, in my opinion, that the Gilboa Dam and the Power Authority could have operated differently to minimize some of the devastation. But in the case of a pipeline, it's something that we're, as human beings, deliberately introducing into this environment that shouldn't be done. And lastly, I would implore you, because you are public servants, to really think about some other important reforms that need to be introduced into this process. Because I can tell you, in 1990, when we went through this, we pleaded with our federal and state governments to increase the regulatory requirements. Of course we didn't succeed. We didn't have the big lobbies that the petrochemical industry has, paying off the politicians and lobbying them so that it was this whole mantra of deregulation and deregulation. So they didn't suffer any consequences from what they had done to our community, killing 2 lives and destroying our community. So what I'd like to see, as part of this process, I'd like to see if it's not required in regulation for the Constitution and Williams and Cabot and all the other companies involved to voluntarily disclose to us what financial contributions you've made to political campaigns. To political action committees and to super PACs, and I'd like to recommend that FERC advocate that this be part of the process, that these pipelines be required on the record to disclose that kind of information, so that we know that we are government of, by, and for. We need full disclosure of the chemicals that are involved in the hydrofracking. We also need full disclosure of who these companies are, how they're interlinked, who their major shareholders and partners are, and what kind of money they're giving to political decision makers. And it should be on the public record. And those
Finally. Again.
Finally. We're the tiniest community in this county. And the loss that we sustained was a tremendous tragedy for our community. And we're here tonight because Bobby Hitchcock and others
losing folks.
They've lost their lives because of the negligence of a pipeline company. We don't want any more
Time.
in our town, and we don't want them in our Schoharie County.